Hello, and welcome to the Crypto Psychedelic panel. Thank you for being here. We're going to, in this session, build on the couple of the talks that came just prior and talk about some of the intersections between the world of cryptocurrency and blockchain and our psychedelic community here. So before we start, actually, I'd like to just ask each of our panelists here to give your short couple-sentence bios of yourselves. Just to give folks a little bit of background.
You're not going to introduce us, Mike? No. Hi, everyone. My name is Liana Gillooly. I am a development officer for the MAPS organization, which I'm sure most of you know about. And I also am very engaged with and interested in the emerging blockchain world and have been involved in a few different blockchain projects, and that is the relevant information to this panel, so thanks.
My name is Joel Dietz. I have a couple degrees in philosophy of religious experiences, specifically epistemology, and I was a founding contributor to the Ethereum project and have led a couple syndicates that are active in making investments in the kind of crypto space. So I guess I've bridged a couple different worlds there, and I'm excited to talk about both of them today.
I'm Matt McKibbin. I've been involved in the crypto, Bitcoin, blockchain space since 2013. Invested in a lot of different Ethereum, all those types of things. And then D10E, Decentralize. Actually, with our second event, we actually had MAPS speak on disrupting, because it was all about decentralization and disrupting current structures with that, which was pretty cool. And then founder of Decentranet and Crypto Psychedelic that we had in Tulum, and we hosted the Crypto Psychedelic cruise in August of last year as well. So big proponent of cryptocurrencies and their support of the psychedelic science industry.
And I'm Mike Margolies. I've been working in the psychedelic community for years now, doing events, producing conferences, participating in others like this one. I was co-director of Symposia for the past few years. Currently, the projects I'm working on now include psychedelic seminars, which is also live events and also online content. And with Matt, co-founded Crypto Psychedelic earlier this year, or I guess end of last year technically, after Liana actually connected us. And so we did this conference in Tulum in February, and the initial idea behind Crypto Psychedelic was to bring these worlds together. As these are two very interesting technologies, and interesting things happen when you bring together communities of smart people that don't know everything about each other. So there's a lot of opportunities for exchanging information, for learning from each other, mirroring. But I guess to start off, it might be helpful. I mean, how many people out here, how many of you feel like you're experts in crypto? How many of you know nothing about crypto? Okay, so you have some background. We'll give you a little bit of context. I'll hand it off to Matt and Joel first to just give a little bit of context on what is blockchain and what is cryptocurrency.
And why should we care about it in reference to this community?
Okay, well, I like to start this out with an Uber driver explanation. That's what I call, because like when you're traveling around, you always have an Uber driver. And they're like, well, what do you do? And they're like, oh, I work in Bitcoin. And oh, what's that? Oh, I heard it went up. And they're like, yeah. Then they ask you to kind of explain what it is, and you have 5 or 10 minutes, and you want to kind of have this. So I kind of go back to the beginning of the internet. There's a lot of protocols for information transfer. So there's TCP/IP, that's the protocol for transferring packets of information from one computer to another on a network. You have HTTP, you have SMTP for email, HTTP for websites. We've never had a protocol for value exchange that wasn't centralized and done by financial institutions or governments. So Bitcoin was the first decentralized protocol for exchanging value across a network. And the first app of that is kind of a unit of account that we can trade with each other back and forth. But that's just kind of the first app of the Internet of Money. And so we have, and then the blockchain portion of it, which is the distributed worldwide ledger, if you will, of where we're keeping track of where all the units of account are and how they're owned. And so we can build other applications where we track value and track information and track who owns what, and then the rules, we can program rules into who owns what and how they're transferred, when they're transferred. You can write if-then statements of when and how the value, and that's a smart contract. So with those building blocks, you can then create organizations that are managed, collaborative organizations, distributed collaborative organizations, where people all over the world can interact with each other and transfer value without actually having to be in the same kind of physical space as a community. And they know that they can depend on the rules of these cryptographic systems to enforce them, and so that they can properly write those governance rules. So there's a worldwide ledger. There's a ledger that we're all maintaining, and no one can go back and erase and forge. There's units of account that we can trade, and we can fund things in that way if we're pre-selling these units of account for this system. And then we can design communities and organizations, or distributed autonomous organizations, with these rule sets on top of these new systems. So.
I'll say that from my perspective, the crypto and psychedelic communities are very similar in the sense of both being attempts at radical disintermediation. And what I mean by that is the banking system, as I'm sure you know, involves you going to a bank. You can set up an account, but your banker will tell you what you can do and not do with that account. And if it falls into any number of questionable categories from the standpoint of your banker, you are immediately barred from being able to transact and do business. And obviously that's a problem for innovation in various things. It's been a huge barrier for any type of innovation in the financial sector because without the ability to hold money and transact, there's only a limited number of applications that you can do. And so cryptocurrencies were designed very clearly to be peer-to-peer and censorship resistant, where really the only people that had any ability to make a decision was the individual holder of that wallet themselves. And to me, this is a very similar concept to what's happened in psychedelic community and people who have a strong emphasis both in meditation, pranayama, direct experience, and that it cuts out a lot of the middlemen potentially that exist that are saying, here's the official book of our religion, here's the official interpretation of that book, and here are all the rules that we have for you to follow. And if you don't comply with these, then sorry, you can't actually be an official member of our church, and then you can't set a bank account. They're all connected in some ways in the end. And then there's this whole, process that's set up around that. And by effectively going back to the source and cutting out all of those layers of middlemen, you create radically autonomous individuals. You create people who are super empowered and then can go out and do all sorts of things that they were completely unable to do in the kind of old world infrastructure where you had to get check marks or approvals from like 3 different sets of people to go out and do something. And I think that's dramatically shifting the world today. I think even just the fact that earlier we're talking about funding new types of psychedelic research or studies like that, these are going to be like incredible enablers for these type of projects in the future because it's really up to the individuals now, and there are not actually these middlemen who used to have so much power in deciding what people did with their lives are going to find and are finding that they just don't have that power anymore.
The thing I'd like to add is just the concept of decentralizing trust. Right now, as you mentioned, we have to go through these bureaucratic systems where we put all of our trust into, and that's how we choose to interact and exchange value in information. And so this concept that trust can be broken down and that we can come together as a community and create networks of trust is something that I think has already been happening in the global psychedelics community for many years. And this is a great enabler, as you said, to these concepts.
Yeah, the concept of trust is a big one. That's good to play in with where these worlds intersect, and also to like build on some things you're already getting at, that there are existing intersections between these worlds. Because that's the question I get asked all the time ever since starting this project: is what does crypto have to do with psychedelics? But I think there's actually there is a lot already existing, and we're going to go beyond that too and start philosophizing and waxing on practical and philosophical ways that they intersect, but maybe we can speak to some of the existing ways that these two communities are already overlapping Venn diagrams.
Sure. I mean, I think that really begins with examining the relationship between the tech movement and the technological community and psychedelics. I mean, some of the earliest creators of the internet and architects of the internet and the creators of Apple and our personal computing devices and everything were heavily influenced by psychedelics. And I've been openly outspoken about this. Everyone from Steve Jobs to the first employees of Sun Microsystems and all these people that have come out and are huge supporters of this movement. And another thing that I like to reference is that one of the earliest use cases for Bitcoin was actually to purchase illegal drugs on the Silk Road. And the Silk Road is actually an incredible tool for harm reduction in the sense that there was a huge amount of information on the products that you can buy on the Silk Road in terms of the quality and what was in it. And there was this already anonymized community that was sharing information and allowed people to trust their sources with this open system, and yeah, there's quite a number of there's 3 people that I know personally that became accidental Bitcoin. Did very well with Bitcoin accidentally because they had leftover Bitcoin in their accounts specifically for purchasing DMT on the dark web. So I find that to be very interesting and telling of this interconnectivity, and also, I mean, there's so much inspiration in the design of the ways that these communities and the ways that blockchain has been established. It's extraordinarily psychedelic. There's some biomimicry aspects where it's pulling information that is mimicking functional relationships found in nature and then applying it to computer technology. And there's a lot of inspiration like that I think is drawn from psychedelics and applied in this way.
This isn't specifically related to psychedelics, but it does relate to mycelium networks. And one story that I like to give in all of my talks, whether or not they're specifically related to psychedelics, and that's that recent research shows that there are these extensive mycelium networks that actually work below the ground and connect directly with the roots of different trees. And that the trees have a communication sort of signaling language that they can say to request particular nutrients that they need for optimal growth. And so effectively what's happening is that there's an underground marketplace for nutrients that is facilitated by these mycelium networks that is an extremely efficient way of supporting the whole ecosystem growth of a particular forest. And so I think that's, in some ways, with these cryptographic ledgers and transfer, we're seeing the equivalent of that in a way that you can look at things from the standpoint of the trees. And when people are building things, I actually often encourage them, since whatever I invest in projects and advise them and stuff, I advise them to build something that looks like a tree from the standpoint of someone who's standing on the ground. It should have a trunk and look like that, and underneath the ground you may have this massive network of roots and whatever integrations and all kinds of things like that are invisible to that person who's just standing on the ground, but so much the better for you, and so much better for the overall health of the network that way.
Yeah, so definitely crowdfunding of projects that we're going to be seeing in terms of like ways that the crypto is applying to psychedelic science research. Now we can see some projects coming out. Pineapple Fund, if you were here earlier, donated $5 million to MAPS in total to fund the phase 3 trials of the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy there. We can see. I kind of think that psychedelics in certain ways kind of remove some of the cultural conditioning that we have from our top-down kind of educational systems about what specific things in society are like money, and encourage us to think about how money it could be different and in these new systems. And then I can see a lot of, in the future at least, I don't know if we're talking about just current applications or future applications, one specific thing that I think would be amazing is to create some advocacy organizations that are what's called a distributed autonomous organization, where it can be a global network that's not dependent upon banking systems to be funded, where you can fund projects and advocacy for the continued use and safety and protection of those who choose to experiment with their own consciousness and with psychedelics. So those ways to basically create a ground-up community around the world using the same kind of currency makes a lot of sense, as well as like now the psychedelic funding of specific research. I would say, I don't know if we're going to go too much into the future stuff yet, but I would say that as crypto grows, and I think it will, because this is the new kind of monetary system of the world that we're looking at, I would say that we could probably be directing lots of specific advocacy towards changing existing regulations, that, like the drug war specifically. If crypto is at $10 trillion or $100 trillion or $20 trillion marketplace, there's going to be a lot of people that have a lot of resources and value to be able to transfer to affecting our laws and potentially getting millions of people out of jail. So I think that's a pretty good future application of what we want to take a look at when funding organizations and foundations.
Yeah. One thing I want to quickly add, thank you for bringing up the donation to MAPS from the Pineapple Fund, which I failed to mention somehow. But one thing that I like saying now, we used to say that MAPS has been unable to receive any funding from traditional institutions and organizations and government programs and things like that, all the places where people would normally receive funding for projects like this. And so what we've been saying for many years now is that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is a gift from the psychedelic community to the world. And as of, because of Pine and the matching grant that he did and everything, or they did, we're not sure about the identity of Pine, we now say that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, well, we've received just under 1/3 of our phase 3 research funding from the cryptocurrency community. And so we now say that the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is a gift from the cryptocurrency community and the psychedelic community to the world. So that's been a significant change in the way that we talk about it. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so there are clearly, there's a lot of existing connections, and I'm going to add a couple of my own too. Actually, you mentioned the connections to nature as well, parallels to mycelial networks, to decentralized networks that we see in blockchain. And in some ways, I see blockchain and cryptocurrency as replicating a lot of things in nature. Like, so what else do we know about that is ultra redundant, that is storing historical information? Well, in every single cell of your body is the DNA, which has our history. So the blockchain, in many ways, is reproducing technology that we have in biology. Our DNA and a blockchain, there's a lot of very interesting parallels between them. Another one I'll throw out there that's an interesting parallel between the two, as some of the research coming out of Beckley Foundation has shown, psychedelics are being shown to disrupt the default mode network, essentially decentralizing the brain. And so there's a very parallel thing happening here where we're talking about decentralizing the brain, decentralizing economies. And as we move forward, we want to replace our existing structures that we have now, which is essentially the drug war, with, I would say, more decentralized systems that are healthier and promote safety and maximize benefits and reduce the risks. And so a question I'd like to ask is, the cryptocurrency community is one that has paid particular attention to questions around decentralization and questions around self-governance. So, what lessons can we learn from what you've been discussing in the crypto world around all these themes that could potentially be applied to the world of psychedelics moving forward into a more mainstream decentralized place, or even potentially the broader drug policy and replacements for the drug war?
I think I'll start with that and say, in short, the opportunity there is immense. It's amazing the new types of things that can be done, but we're in a very, very early stage when it comes to the technology, and it's good to be aware of that. And to give a couple of specific examples, I did the first election on the Bitcoin blockchain for the first sort of nonprofit foundation, which is the Bitcoin Foundation, and it was very controversial for a bunch of different things. And one of them was that many people in the Bitcoin community did not think that the Bitcoin blockchain should be used for governance or anything other than digital cash transactions. So just that in and of itself set off a large controversy, let alone the details of the technological implementation. And the other largest sort of experiment on the Ethereum blockchain sort of exploded due to a technological error. So there are a lot of fascinating efforts that are going on right now that can illustrate the potential of what could be done in the future. And one of the ones that I'm very involved with that is probably the largest active version of this is the Dash community. And Dash has an amazing method where you stake. You can set up a master node in their system, and then everyone who has one of these nodes can then vote on what certain amount of community budgeting happens, and that happens every month. And then they've gone out and been able to fund all kinds of projects, from actual physical implementations in Zimbabwe to advertisements that are on the back of like your airplane, kind of thing, and various things that some of the other cryptocurrency communities haven't been able to do due to lack of coordination. And that's a fully decentralized model as well. So you don't have to be public as to who is a master node owner. Everything is running in a kind of decentralized voting mechanism. And there are other systems that are coming online that have similar properties to them. And I think that there will be many, many things, to kind of Matt's point, that can illustrate that with these sort of DAOs that are basically transnational organizations that have a specific purpose behind them. Say, we all raise money to say we want to fund not only the next phase of MAPS research, but we want to phase the next phase of, development of a particular, neurologically, your neurological substrate. And we want to just put, $1 million into a pool, and then have a bunch of people, it's actually what the X Prize model is, if anyone knows about it, and then fund the best applications and research proposals that come in out of that pool. And we can do that right now. The technology exists for us to do that in a fully decentralized way. And I mean, those type of things are, super exciting, and they also, have very little dependencies on the existing system. So.
Yeah. One thing I was just going to say as well, we're talking a lot about the funding side of blockchain technology, but there's another. Cryptocurrency is one application of blockchain technology, and I think the other area that's been very interesting to me is more in the healthcare space and in the data space, in the managing personalized healthcare data information, and it's many years away. Like he said, this technology is really, really young, and it's something to keep in mind as we're exploring these topics. There's a lot of incredible visioning happening right now, and the practical applications that we're going to end up that are going to be created over the next 5-10 years are going are yet to be seen, remain to be seen, how we're going to functionally utilize the blockchain in our day-to-day life. And so one of the areas that's been interesting to me is ways in which researchers can easily share data, can verify data, ways in which the blockchain can impact the healthcare system, and perhaps even flip the incentive so that we can actually create a true healthcare system and not a sick care system that manages sick patients but increases wellness for others and incentivizes wellness. So there's a lot of other use cases that deserve exploration beyond just the use of cryptocurrency.
I'll add just a small thing. They said it's early. It's very early in terms of the technology. You know, Netscape came out in, 1994 was the first, big browser that came out. I don't even think we have a really big browser for the Internet of Money yet. So we're pre-Netscape in the Internet of Money, to put it in perspective. I'll just add the protocols for psychedelic integration, or people having their own experiences, should be open source, to have your own experience, to be able to be treated, and to be, I think everyone should share that, just as much of the cryptocurrency community is developing open source protocols for governance, for transfer. And so you can always kind of take what someone's done and fork it a little bit and change it a little bit. There shouldn't be one top-down approach to how psychedelics are necessarily administered within society. So I think that's another comparison between the two communities, very much so.
Also, Matt, we were talking a little bit earlier about the IP potential. Do you want to? Yeah, I think you should touch on that.
So he talked about his security token for the Trip.io. One specific thing that I know is coming with these different types of security tokens. So there's the utility tokens, and for people that aren't familiar, which is basically supposed to be giving you access to an open source software system, and it has some sort of utility within that system. So you're pre-selling credits and entry to open source software. With these financial applications, we can also now start selling creative forms of securities that are more liquid and more free to be sold around. And one type of revenue stream that could be securitized is the revenue streams of drugs, of pharmaceutical investments. So if you were to be someone who's producing in the future MDMA, or it would be better if the entire world owned the IP to MDMA and acid and psilocybin versus some pharmaceutical company. We don't want that to happen, right? So what is a way that the entire world can benefit by selling kind of a tokenized common security, something? And this is just something we were thinking about, because we'd rather not have one entity necessarily own it for the rest of time. So being able to fund specific drugs and their development through a tokenized security where everyone in the world could participate in those profits might be pretty interesting.
And it also feeds.
I was going to say, the pharmaceutical companies are going to do this with their own drugs. I see a lot of these projects coming about with these security token platforms, so we might as well be doing it too.
Right, yeah, and so one of the, there's this recent statement that was made by the Council of Spiritual Practices called the Open Sciences and Praxis Statement, and basically every researcher on the planet, and everyone including names like Ram Dass, signed it. And what it said is that they wouldn't impede each other by filing IP or holding information close that would create an opportunity for whoever was doing that to maximize profits or for commercial gain. And so this question then is left of, if there is IP to file, and many of these things you can't file IP on, they're open source, they're in the commons, but the access to them will be regulated, and so that's kind of the opportunity there. But this question of, if there is IP that can be filed on certain things, is it better for us to come together as a scientific community and say, we're never going to file IP? Well, somebody's going to file that IP and gain the benefit for it. So the question is, how can we come together as a scientific community and own that together? And I think that's one of the opportunities that this technology can enable.
Be owned by a DAO.
Yeah, I think this is a common problem in the software industry, and is something in general that independent people or small projects are at risk of being crushed by sort of tech titans because tech titans don't just get IP to use IP; they get IP to use sort of Armageddon-like IP wars with each other to kind of see who's violating what patents. And there's a very strong case to make sort of defensive, collaboratively owned patent pools and other kind of IP. It's not actually that difficult to do structurally from a legal standpoint. And I think it would be hugely advantageous in these type of things because in some ways it's sort of on that same theme that we kind of opened up with of like radically empowering the individual, and then it kind of shifts the ball game a little bit from, hey, these giant corporates have all the power, and then there's these little people who wander around. If they get too close to a corporate, then it's corporate's interest that they just get crushed. And building these type of infrastructure that is a sort of, even if it's just a defensive measure, it actually dramatically shifts it sort of in the opposite direction, which obviously I'm extremely in favor of.
One specific framework that's coming out is Social Evolution is funding a DISC framework, so distributed income something collaborative system or something like that. That's building some of these types of frameworks. I'm sure there's some on Ethereum and maybe EOS eventually as well. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say about all of this as well is, so MAPS filed a public benefit corporation. That's actually the sole investor in that is the nonprofit. And one of the things that is with everyone on my team and is thinking about is how can we create the most visionary business possible? And we're essentially building a pharmaceutical company, right? We're going to be the sole manufacturers of MDMA for 5 years. We have this data exclusivity and we have this opportunity. And so this question remains and it's unanswered of how can we embrace the most visionary tactics so that we can create these opportunities and build out this emerging movement and industry in the most visionary way possible. And I think that employing some of these tactics and technologies are going to create a lot of benefit for us in that direction.
Can we tokenize the equity in the benefit corp?
We can talk about it.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah, and I'd like to come back to a point that's and reemphasize this idea of open source, and I think it applies a lot of ways, not only in IP, but the idea that these blockchain, these cryptocurrencies are open source is a way of keeping decentralization honest and a way of getting consent, right? And this applies if we're talking about decentralized models for psychedelic providers. Open source can apply to the methods. If different providers are using their different techniques, and different groups come together and say, well, we believe this technique should work. I don't think that there should be one ring to rule them all as far as the master psychedelic therapy technique. And the question with that then is, okay, well then what do you do? How do you safeguard people? And I would say that being open source, if providers are open source about in terms of this is the methodology that I'm operating under, and then giving people who come to them informed consent, and that's another key word here is consent. Open source is one way to achieve that in a world where people have a choice of options about where to go with psychedelic therapy. And so, and what I want to maybe dive into next is another word, intention, right? And we talk about a lot in the psychedelic community, and we've discussed in this conference here about the shadow sides, right? So we all, maybe after discussing this a lot, we understand psychedelics aren't inherently good or bad, but there's a lot of set and setting, and intention is built into that, are going to inform that psychedelic experience. And I would say this applies to pretty much any technology, including blockchain. And so I'd like to just maybe have a discussion around that, around the role of intention in terms of how it can inform our use of these technologies, and how do we orient ourselves, and how can we even mirror as communities against each other to keep ourselves aligned and with integrity and with the right intentions.
I really love this this topic and question. I think it's it's the most critical conversation that we should be having right now, especially in the realms of emergent technology, especially if you're talking about AI as well, which is a whole other conversation. I understand that all technology is imbued by and has the residual energies of the intention for which it was created. And so I believe that the great opportunity in the combination of, or the influence of psychedelics on the emergence of blockchain technology is that we can take some of the qualities that are inherent inside the psychedelic experience, the sensations of unity and oneness, some awareness of being part of something that's bigger than yourself, this sense of ethics and morality and codes of conduct and all these things. There's a really amazing perspective that many, if not most, arrive at through doing work, especially if you're having intention and doing focused work in psychedelics, that I think can inform this new technology. There's this great conference on transformational technology that happens in the Bay Area every year, and that community is very focused on developing technologies that can increase empathy, with the understanding that we've developed all of these technologies without understanding the impact on humanity. And everything just happened at rapid fire and happened so fast, and everyone has to beat their competitor and all these things. And so certain things we're not taking into consideration. And so now there's a movement, a small but growing movement of people who are very focused on what are the types of technologies that can increase our empathy and our humanity and be beneficial for the environment and all of these things. And I see that intentional psychedelic use can inform people and put people in right relationship with themselves, their communities, and the earth, and that if we apply those principles in the development of this new technology, that we can create technologies that also do that as well.
So I think I'm going to dramatically agree with one of your things and dramatically disagree with the other one. I've been involved with several very successful open source movements, from Ruby on Rails to some of the Linux flavored things to the early Ethereum community. And all of them had a very clear sense of what they were doing and why. And it was a very organic process. Many people who I knew worked on Ethereum did it so without pay. They came with the Occupy movement and other things like that for a long period. And I think there was a very clear intention behind that for at least some of the founders that went way beyond any sort of business or economic interests, and to some degree did get polluted by the presence of economic interests that entered in at various points. I think that, I haven't seen this used extensively in any of these systems so far, but I could see psychedelics being very useful for ensuring that there is a very common and clear intention behind founding teams. I'm also familiar with other types of therapy like circling and things like that. I think there's really good ways for people to kind of go in and ensure that people are coming into the project, particularly in the early stages, with the right sort of intentions behind it. And I've certainly seen projects go awry that had the wrong intentions, or where there was just something where someone was a little bit, off, and then it kind of pulled things in a negative or inappropriate direction. The thing that I'm going to say is a cautionary word, because I've seen things also go askew for this several times, is that they just try and solve too many things at the same time. And my experience with technological innovation is that it starts with a problem that's clear that you're trying to fix, that you go through, you fix it, maybe you create other problems or other things as you're fixing that thing, and that you keep having to go through an iterative process around that. And if you start too soon in the process and say, hey, let's optimize our initial team for diversity, or let's, have a this, that, and the other kind of thing, then you'll end up with this long checklist of all the things that you want to achieve, but you will actually end up achieving way less of any of those things because you haven't actually, stayed focused on something that's achievable in the kind of short term. So I think that's one lesson that I I've learned from being involved with some projects that had very beautiful kind of stated intentions, both around collaborative governance and otherwise, but that weren't actually able to make that large of an impact, and particularly not even, some cases, not even achieving economic sustainability behind their project, because they were trying to like make too many people happy at the same time.
I'll add just kind of an anecdote here in terms of intention. You know, in the first block of Bitcoin, there was a headline that was put on with a specific intention of kind of why this system was being created. So in there was January 9th, 2009, the London Times headline of second bank bailouts to occur in a thing, and you know, was kind of the genesis block of this new economic system that was supposed to be open and transparent, and you know, hopefully kind of solve some of the problems that were what happened because of our old legacy financial system that is not open and transparent, and there's a lot of interest there. So blockchain was released onto the world with a very specific intention of changing the world financial system in that sense, and then the iteration. So I think with the psychedelic community, I think integrating, we have a very specific intention to help people transform through these medicines, and so I think I just wanted to kind of point that out specifically. They both have a very specific intention there.
Yeah, the other thing I just wanted to add is it's something I say all the time when I'm speaking about psychedelics, is that it is, and psychedelics, and the same with blockchain, they're just tools. It matters how we use them. And they can be used for good, and they can be used for harm. And so that is they're not the silver bullet, they're not the answer, they're not inherently good. It's how we use them. And much like psychedelics, the preparation and integration matter as much or even more than the journey itself. And so how we choose to go about doing this and constructing this and then integrating it into our society and ensuring that there's appropriate access and that we're thinking about all these things and acknowledging our blind spots and everything matters as much as the tool itself.
Okay. Well, let's do. I guess we'll start taking questions. So the question here was with regard to the cost of mining, essentially on the amount of energy used to mine. I'll let these guys field that question.
Yeah. So securing trust and freedom on the planet it takes energy, it takes work, because we've never had a system that's been transparent and that we can all kind of utilize that has done that. And so the way that they did that was through this proof of work algorithm. They solved a really, really big computer science problem called the Byzantine generals problem, which he could probably talk about in various things. So this solved a really big problem around the world, and it does take a lot of energy. However, a lot of them are kind of skewed in some ways because we're not looking at the big picture of what it costs to run and what the externalities are of the legacy financial system and how much waste, fraud, and abuse that we have as a society is being put into that. All the corruption, all the billions and billions and billions and trillions of dollars, all the war that's fiat currency, because people can use money to invade other people. I mean, the dollar in itself is kind of a utility token for oil, the petrodollar. And so there's all these unseen costs in there. I would also say that for hope of this system, there's a lot of new clean energy terms of like solar and wind that are coming out that are becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And as that kind of threshold crosses where they become cheaper than the fossil fuel burning ones, it's actually going to be a bounty and encourage people to be producing the cleanest forms of energy on the planet, like solar and wind. And actually there was a Lazard investment banking thing that happened last year where they said that it was cheaper unsubsidized in the United States for wind and solar. So these are actually now becoming a 12.5 Bitcoin bounty on the cleanest forms of energy to incentivize people to build those around the world, because they can take some of that extra energy that they have and contribute to the worldwide financial system.
Yeah.
Well, but it then incentivizes. It's a bounty to make the cleanest form. So it's saying, well, you're an engineer. Go figure out how to make the system way more efficient. And here's 12.5 Bitcoins, which is what, $6,000. So 12.5 times $6,000 bounty on figuring out the cleanest, best forms. Also, I would say there are new forms that are much energy more efficient, such as delegated proof of stake, which we're still, EOS is coming out with that. BitShares. We'll see how those types of models work out. We don't know.
The amount of energy used on the legacy financial system that we currently have in terms of running banking systems and buildings and printing money and all these things is an order of magnitude less than the energy that is currently being used for mining Bitcoin and these other types of operations.
Less or greater?
It's the amount of energy, it's an order of magnitude greater. I'm saying that the system we're talking about creating is ultimately a order of magnitude incomparably less amount of physical energy, and the amount of destruction on the environment is going to be, it's all right. I mean, it's so difficult to imagine the amount of energy that goes into running our current banking systems all over the planet. And so doing it in this way will ultimately be way less energy expensive.
Yeah, and I guess another thing I'd like to reemphasize that Matt mentioned briefly there is that there are other systems that are in development right now. So this proof of work, which is creating this energy consumption, this is the first pass. It's not the end-all, be-all of what blockchain technology is going to run on. So there's proof of stake, delegated proof of stake, and at this point I'm getting beyond my ability to explain intelligently what these all mean relative to each other. Before we actually open up to more questions, I have one more question I want to ask, actually, and then we'll open up for more audience questions. And what I'm really... Oh, did you want to say anything about the...
Yeah, sure. I'll just briefly recap. So I think I agreed with everything Matt said, but there are a lot of different alternative systems under development, as has been mentioned. The cost of maintaining existing infrastructure, if you just think about gold or the cost of like maintaining property rights, you're talking about the cost of having a deployed military that is sitting around ready to defend the property that, and these like land titles. So it's a very relative thing where you can, and I think the right way of approaching it is to look at the costs of all of these different systems relative to each other and the way that things can be optimized in the future. And so I'm not confident personally that there won't be a continuing problem of high energy usage from the Bitcoin network. I think it is very high. But I do think that there is also incentives for creating it to be more optimized and for creating other types of better things in the future. So.
Yeah, so last question I have is, what are some practical governance tools that we can, so where can we practically apply blockchain technology in terms of things like, for example, new self-regulation systems and new models we can create? What are some actual practical things we can use the technology for?
Well, I'd like to bridge into the trust thing that we kind of started with, and it was a really exciting discussion we had earlier because we were talking about how some of the trust and things that are needed in the cryptocurrency stuff with respect to bad actors. Probably everyone's heard about these hacks and fraud and various types of thefts. So there's known bad actors in the system is similar in some ways to dealing with kind of bad actors and other types of, say, shamans gone wrong or things like that, which probably some of you have experience with. I certainly do. And how do you create the right kind of infrastructure that prevents those things from happening? And I think Liana said that Silk Road in some ways may have been a step in the right direction of creating a market-based system that then rewarded people for providing more information, and an actual reputation system that said, hey, look, this is a sort of credible source for these things. So I suspect that the technology is there, available for us to do these type of things today, to create kind of more robust reputational systems that can have an enhanced level of trust, both penalizing bad actors and really promoting the kind of people who are providing positive services.
Definitely the positive service, the reputation system. So someone that wants to create a decentralized application for specific types of shaman experiences. If you have people that are going back and leaving that feedback, oh yeah, I had a great experience, I had a great experience, I had a great experience, and then there's 1,000 reports of this person being a really good leader in this ceremony. The chances of them being a bad leader, the next one is probably much lower. Just like if you were ordering MDMA on the Silk Road, that if there's 1,000 reviews of this person giving you actually MDMA and has been tested by the people, then chances of them, throwing in a bunch of meth for no reason doesn't make any sense, right? So definitely, if someone wanted to create a decentralized application there, there's a company or the protocol called Native coming out, which is micro communities that can have their own tokens and can fund different types of initiatives within their community. I think that if people wanted to create a psychedelic advocacy community and then fund initiatives for people to go out and say, hey, I'm going to go teach these people in this meetup, and you can incentivize them with these community tokens. I think that would be a practical application that you could do. Giveth with Griff Green is a nonprofit, basically nonprofit tokens that you can control the governance of when someone does something for a decentralized nonprofit. I don't think he wants to fund psychedelic things in his first iteration of his product because I think it would be too controversial. Maybe a year from now. But those types of practical applications, we mentioned a lot of ones that I think will come in the future earlier. You could, in some theory, have supply chain types of applications where if you were going to have some sort of medicine created, you could kind of track the history of where it was and make sure that whoever was providing that, that it's actually from there, if they signed with their private key, that's going on there. I'm not sure that you want to track that way and have an immutable trail of where those things come from. But you could hypothetically track those types of substances there. So
I'm hearing in all of this tools for self-regulation. And self-regulation I'm hugely interested in that. I have a background working in the cannabis industry and on cannabis advocacy in the US. And there are many things that I think that we did not go far enough on. And one of them was by creating self-regulation in our community of standards and ethics and protocols and things like that, these concepts are now being explored retroactively, which I think is too little too late at this point. But I think that the blockchain community and the psychedelics community are both, and I know of different projects in both communities that this concern of how do we regulate as a community so that we don't have to rely on our governments to regulate our best practices and protocols. And so there's more and more tools emerging, and there's more interest around this, and it's an area I'm very interested in.
Just to close it out, I'd like to make a pitch for Anarcha Portugal, since I think maybe all of us will be there, and there will be a lot of deep discussion on this particular thing, the crypto, psychedelics, and I think some projects maybe emerge from that. It's happening just before Boom.
Yes, and so if you're sticking around the area, come check it out. It'll be in July, right before Boom. And we have a panel at Boom Festival as well, if you're going to be at Boom. So come check out our crypto psychedelic panel there too. So let's open up for questions. I guess I'll give away this microphone.
So I'd like to address the environmental issue again, because your answers were good but not satisfying to me. I feel that our future governments are going to be these technologies. And what's blocking the option of using alternative energy, alternative to fossil fuels at the moment are our governments. So if we are going to replace our governments with these technologies, we should think of what other alternatives we want to create, instead of using personal interests to not use these green technologies. We should be promoting this and investing in this. And how is this connected to psychedelics? I think that psychedelics teach us that our Earth is the most important thing. And psychedelic therapy, we all care about it. That's why we're here. But if we don't have our resources, then our therapy won't help us that much. And I think that our first priority should be investing in green energy, and the rest should come after that. So I'd like you to address that, please.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for bringing it up again. One thing that you kind of touched on the end is priority, right? What are the first use cases of blockchain technology that are going to be functional in our society? And one of my great fears about this whole movement in general is that the same populations, marginalized populations that are disproportionately negatively impacted by our current economic system are going to be also negatively impacted by this movement. If we were to collapse the current economic system as it is today, tomorrow, people who look like you and I and are here today are not going to be the ones that are negatively impacted by a collapse like that. There are populations that are totally dependent on certain social services for reasons that are socially influenced as well and are systematically influenced. So this question of priority of where should we focus on building functional blockchain technology and implementing this into our society, and I'm of the opinion that we need to focus on the transition, this period of transition, where there's something to be said of the fact that we don't want to just turn around and collapse all of our infrastructure and systems tomorrow. There's a lot that's working. We have roads, and we have firefighters, and we have things, we have systems in place. And so this question of how can we create uses that transition us from where we are today to where we are going tomorrow. And so, and then to bring that back to the environmental question, I think it's in emergency planet Earth right now. I mean, it's full-blown emergency status right now. There are, and people just, we're still in this state of international apathy around that in terms of how our governments react to that. So, yeah, I think that this community and these technologies are uniquely positioned to provide real solutions to transition the systems that we're in right now to where we are going tomorrow. And there's currently certain projects I can name. I just learned about a carbon catching. So there's carbon markets right now, and this is carbon capturing markets on the blockchain, right? And so there's all these things that we can do to start flipping the systems in this direction. And I think that is what I would like to see the larger community be focused on, or what are these transition projects?
Well, I just want to ask you guys, can you create a proof of good environmentalism concept that would work?
Yeah. Well, there was a Medium article that was written about value, right? And this concept of value. $1 is $1 because we all collectively agree that that is the right value amount. And it's one collective hallucination, if you will. It's this collective belief system that we all have. And so if we were to shift what we valued and what we perceived as valuable, and the Medium article was about valuing the global commons, and which is our resources that we all share, and creating some sort of market or system off of valuing our commons. And so that's like one concept that I've seen put forth.
So yeah, in terms of the environment, I think blockchains are one of the biggest tools that are going to help us incentivize the proper ways to take care of our environment on a scalable level, where we can actually say, hey, do you want to clean this up? You can earn some sort of incentive token to go clean up massive amounts of pollution, as well as there's many different initiatives that are building solar and wind types of applications. Impact PPA, and these are some companies that I'm working with. Impact PPA, purchase power agreement, is like the M-Pesa kind of decentralized energy. They have a solar panel and wind and a battery pack, and you can buy a minute or an hour thing. And they just turn the lights on with all these microgrids around the world. Haiti, Laissez-Voir Haiti, for the example, they just turned the lights on for the first time since Hurricane Matthew in 2015, building those. They have one where they're going to be putting 50 million women in India and bringing power to their houses so that they can be part of this distributed like clothing DAO kind of thing that's going on, working with the government there. The carbon markets as well, just in being able to crowd fund the green energy types of solutions around the world is one of the biggest applications of these cryptocurrency things. And I said, everyone kind of focuses. They see all these headlines of like Bitcoin is using more power than Ireland, and that's what they or Iceland is doing all this. But they're investing in this new energy infrastructure that's allowing us to fund all these new types of green energy things. So if anything, I think the blockchain type applications are the ones that are going to be able to save us and incentivize the proper ways of funding these things, because the top-down structures are failing at that. The UN and the IMF and the World Bank, they're failing at actually providing these types of things. So, yeah. Well, I mean, it is. I mean, it's.
Yeah. I actually want to say I'm especially sympathetic to what you're saying, because I stayed out of any involvement with Bitcoin or blockchain, which didn't even exist at the time, for about 2 years because of environmental concerns, and I was working on an eco-currency with kind of intentional communities at the same time. And what I saw, and I think this is a sad reality, and I'm not happy about saying this, but that the people who had that type of intention were not well financed or well networked enough to actually get anything off the ground that was meaningful at scale. I'm currently advising Damanhur, which is an intentional community with a long history in northern Italy, and other things like that. And still, many of these issues persist with the things that would be the ideal circumstance from my perspective of what I think a currency system should represent. And yet, when I observe a Bitcoin and the founding intention there, it was, let's get rid of the ability of banks to print money and make it more like gold. And that comes with a whole lot of sort of energy around that particular application, which is very skeptical by and large towards anything like you're talking about, which would be a much more proactive stance towards addressing problems in the world. The one thing that I do agree about is I think we are taking steps in the right direction in the larger community in building technology that does allow these type of governmental concerns to be built into them from the fabric. But I still think we're 2 or 3 steps from really having anything meaningful.
One thing I'll add as well is that this concept of voting with your dollars is what these technologies are also enabling. And so then it becomes about, it's not what is the blockchain community's priority, but what are the people who are engaging in the communities, what are their priorities, and how are they, because this is radical autonomy is what these systems promote and enable. And so it becomes about then how do we galvanize those communities together and get them focused and working on things. But it's going to be this process of learning and becoming empowered about how we choose to invest or use our cryptocurrency or invest in certain blockchain applications and things like that. It's not just the blockchain community creating solutions, it's the users of the community as well that matter.
Yeah, another thing I would add here is our systems right now are based on extraction, including our economy. Our economy is based on wealth extraction versus, say, the opposite of that, I would say, is value creation. And then the healthcare industry is like a great example of that. It's not based on creating value, which to me would be promoting healthcare, but it's about wealth extraction. How can I use sickness, and what can I do in the way to extract wealth out of the fact that people are sick? And so in many ways, this is an effort in flipping our incentive structures in the economy out of wealth extraction and into value creation. And so now we have tools where we can, for the first time maybe in history, any one of us can create, we can, maybe not any of us can do it now, but you can, and a person, not a government, can create new economies. We can create economies with our own rules. We can invent rules for economies. So the question I'd pose is, what are the rules of your ideal economy? And we can make that. And that is, I think, a really amazing opportunity we have now, is we can flip the rules of the economy and incentivize things the way that we think they should be incentivized.
Hi, I'm hugely inspired by the crypto community, by the decentralization movement and the crypto psychedelic sort of movement that is emerging. Something a little abstract perhaps, but it does feel to me very masculine. I felt that crypto psychedelic. And I don't necessarily think this is a problem or a bad thing, but there's a certain feeling that I get from you there on the stage talking about this. There does seem to me to be many fewer women, feminine people engaged in the crypto movement. I'm curious for your thoughts on whether this is the case, and if so, whether it's an issue, whether it's a problem, and how, and more generally, how we ensure there's a diversity of people entering into this movement. And because of course it's a problem in the psychedelic movement as well. I think we do a little bit better on the gender issue, but as people have reflected this weekend, it's overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly people middle class or with money. And thanks.
It's a very accurate observation, in my opinion. And I heard a statistic earlier that I haven't fact-checked, which is that 90% of the holders of Bitcoin are male currently on the planet. And we can go into the reasons why, but I think it's more important to be solution-oriented. And so what it comes down to is including diverse voices. And so one of the challenges, I think, and one of the things that I like to do when I'm talking to blockchain companies is ask them, who's on their team, and have they made efforts into including diverse voices into the decision makers of their teams? And this is a process, and I think that we're living in a very globally patriarchal, masculine, energized planet. And so we have the opportunity now we're creating tools to help us transition into a more balanced, energetic expression on this planet. And I think it is a process, and I think it's also a problem. And so I personally am engaged in women's groups, both in the psychedelic and in the crypto communities, who are constantly talking about this. And we do have a huge problem with access as well, access to information, access to the technology itself. There are people without cell phones that could super benefit from accessing cryptocurrencies because they have destabilized governments and volatile economies and things like that. So this question is a very, very big one, and I don't necessarily have an answer to it. I have just more questions about it, and I think that this is where we have to get proactive, and we have to stretch ourselves and be engaged with exploring potential solutions for this. And I think it starts with just inviting people in and ensuring that we're including diverse voices in everything that we're doing and in our own decision making for our own organizations and our own just all the questions we have in our own lives.
Yeah. I would just add that I think that the women in blockchain movement is growing very rapidly. There's a Women Blockchain Foundation. There's the Crypto Queens Facebook group started by Anu, and there's people wearing Satoshi as female shirts all over the world. I think that it's still very male dominated, and it always has been. But there have been more women at the crypto event that I've seen, much more than in any other time period that I've been involved in the industry for 5 years or greater than 5 years. So I think we are changing the balance and inviting more women to invest and be a part of it as much as possible, as well as other diverse groups of people. But it takes finding community leaders within those groups to empower those communities. It can't be the white guy sitting on the stage, right? And so we need to find those community leaders to go get them to bring in the communities and teach them.
So next question is basically, psychedelics reconnect us to nature. A lot of people that take psychedelics would like to get back to nature, to grow food, things like that, but a lot of people don't have the resources, and blockchain now allows us with distributed purchasing qualities where we can collaborate. And I want to know some visions you might have on future collaboration of purchasing and reorganizing our lives, because we're all living distributed lives, and I see the same people all over the world, and but then we're going back to places we might not even want to live, in between these gatherings. So
yeah, so I think Jeffsky's asking for visioning around what could our future look like, I think is what you're asking, with these technologies at play. And I have a lot of kind of fantasies, fully automated gay space communism. No, I'm joking, but that's a fun meme being tossed around right now. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of different ways to solve this and to look at it. And from my vantage point right now, I can't tell how the chips are going to fall at this point. I don't really know. Is it that there's like communities like the New Mundo community, right, which is a globalized community of intentional and communities and eco-villages and sustainable farms and also retreat centers. And so I know that they're currently getting together to launch an ICO, right? So perhaps engaging in a globalized community who has real estate to create this decentralized distributed living situation might be one potential solution, where you're then in environments where people are growing their own food and are environmentally minded and spiritually minded or what have you. You have some sort of alignment in that, and then growing that network might be a near future of viability. Do you guys have any other visionings for the future for us?
I think in general, when you get to kind of land and land usage, people who have benefited from the extreme edge of community building, intention, and economic prosperity that's associated with that are going to reinvest it in the same things that they benefited from. And so when they see those same criteria coming up, where it's like a commitment to doing something really visionary that also includes a very innovative technology and a kind of grit and a kind of determination, that they're going to put the money that they got back into these type of projects. And so that's what I've been observing so far. And I think sometimes it takes a couple cycles because it's still building baseline financial infrastructure. But the types of agricultural projects or type of kind of development projects that will get a lot of funding later on will probably be the ones that have the same characteristics.
I have a question.
You might have an answer.
Are any of you familiar with what kind of impact quantum computing would have on cryptocurrencies? Because it's my understanding that it's probably still a couple decades out, but that the nature of the superposition and entanglement would basically solve encryption quite quickly. And I'm just wondering if there's like another plan, or if that's not even true, or if this is like something that will happen in 20 years, or if I don't know.
Yeah, I know a little bit about the subject, and I think the general estimates are somewhere like 5 to 10 years from now. It depends on the number of qubits that your quantum computer has, and it does threaten the kind of current state of encryption and the like SHA-256 and some of the things that are used. There are alternatives. So there are already developed quantum proof sort of encryption mechanisms. They're not in as robust use, but it's not that hard to switch from current technology into those when it becomes a real threat. So I think that's why, by and large, the cryptocurrency community has been unfazed by that. There is, of course, the chance that someone would unknowingly to the larger community develop something and then kind of compromise stuff through that ability to break encryption. That's something that's happened before, in the Cold War and various things like that. So there are definitely risks there. But by and large, I think most of the common problems have already sort of been solved.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a definitive answer or not, but I want to get back to the metaphor of the parallels of this technology to nature here. And this is kind of, the technological form of evolution. And where in evolution you see, okay, so we develop a system with antibodies, and then bacteria evolve, and viruses evolve, and we back and forth to adapt against each other. And I think that's going to happen with technology also. So as there's quantum hacking, there's going to be quantum blockchain or quantum cryptography. I don't know what that is. I just made up that phrase, but presumably if there's quantum hacking, there's quantum cryptography. So, and I think, and then what's beyond that, there'll be something beyond that gets discovered, and as evolution I think it's just what we do.
So yeah, that's perfect time for me to ask my question. Hi, my name's Shimon Newman. I'm the founder of Trip.io. I'm actually building it on Ethereum, so thank you. There's a lot of questions I want to ask you, but this is perhaps the biggest one. So you're talking about evolution, right? And you're drawing these parallels. And there are a lot of commonalities between the cryptocurrency community and the psychedelic community. And I think one of the biggest ones is that it's mostly well-intentioned people of privilege that are gathering at both. And with a world that has been so ravaged and colonized by well-intending people of power for so long, how can I, as someone who's participating in the cryptocurrency community and the psychedelic community, and how can we all ensure that we are not just entering a new stage of colonialism where we say that, look at these communities, hey, this is better for you. This is the way. Cryptocurrency is the future. And I'm also very interested to know, especially on a more philosophical level, what parallels you can drive behind the ethos or the drive behind the cryptocurrency movement, and that of something like Neoplatonism or more of Judeo-Christianic views of transcendence or in transhumanism of the singularity. A lot of the language I see in the crypto community seems to be referential to this, and it's something I'm very fearful of.
So, yeah, thanks for that question. I'm going to answer the first part of that. I can't speak to the transhumanism aspect, but I have also thought about, these questions around how do we avoid reproducing the same kind of injustices in different forms and just imposing new systems. And I can tell you what I'm working on personally. This is a project that's I'll just say it's in the ideal phase right now, but I'm starting to build the connections necessary to make this happen and make it a reality. But I'm from Baltimore, so I'm going to do work where I know, in Baltimore. And so in Baltimore, I observe this. I go to these drug policy conferences and all this, and I have access to this information and resources, and it's great. And we can talk among ourselves in this privileged group about the best drug policy and all this, and best harm reduction techniques. And in my opinion, especially if we're talking about decentralized models and anarchism and all this, right? The model I want to see is it can't come from a government policy being passed. It has to come from the ground level. It has to be driven from the ground itself. So I'm currently working to figure out build relationships in the community itself and say, hey, look, I've got access to this information, these people, these resources, people who work in safe consumption sites in Portugal, where I'm going next, or people who know about different ideas of how to work through addiction in the context of with children, or in education, or in healthcare, people that are working in psychedelic research, and ask, hey, this is what I have to offer. These are people I can bring here to Baltimore. What would be helpful for you? What do you want to do? We can make a summit. We can bring together people here in Baltimore too that are working in their own silos. And what can come? And this is an idea that was very inspired by working in this crypto psychedelic space, talking about decentralization and building networks. Because I was observing there's all these people working in different directions, and our default is go through policy. But what if we just connect the dots? What if all these people working in different directions in Baltimore and internationally, we bring them together and just make those relationships happen and really have it be driven by the community itself. So the idea is not to come in and say, well, I know how to solve the problem in Baltimore. We're going to make a safe consumption site, but have the community most affected. Be in West Baltimore and East Baltimore and say, all right, what are you going to do? Here's the resources. You drive it. So that's my personal answer to that question. The transhumanism stuff, I'll defer on though.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, I was just trying to pull up this quote really quickly, but I don't think I'll be able to pull it up fast enough. So my biggest thing is acknowledging our blind spots, first and foremost. Acknowledging all the things that we cannot see in our fields of vision and knowing that they're there and doing exactly what Mike is doing and referring to and being led by the people that we're trying to help. So not coming in there saying, we have the answers, we are here to help you and save you and do these things for you, but asking, what do you need? Can you lead us? And then we can apply our resources and things with your leadership. And I think that's really important. And the quote that I was just looking for says something along the lines of, if you're coming here to help me or serve me or whatever, then I am not interested in that. But if you're coming here because your liberation is bound with mine, then please join me and we will work together and we will work by each other's side. And so it matters a lot, our approach. And this is part of the being proactive about who you are putting on your team, about who you are putting in your frame of reference, in terms of who you're getting your opinions and feedback loops from. If we are just in an echo chamber with each other, which is so much of the circles that I roll in tend to feel like that, then we are not going to be able to have any of the impact that we are seeking. It doesn't matter how good our intention is. And so getting out of this concept of leading and getting more into the creating invitations to be led is something I'm actively working on in my own life.
I would just rewind things a little bit and say, there are definitely people who have a messianic idea of like libertarianism and other things like that. But if you look at some of the core ideas, if you ever go back and read von Mises or something like that, he's writing about theory of human action and how humans relate to institutions and collectives and things. And his fundamental insight, which I highly recommend going and reading in his book on human action, is that we often are unconscious in how we relate to collective institutions. And if we actually go back and develop a higher degree of consciousness around that, then we find that there are all sorts of ways that we can negotiate our own involvement in these type of institutions, so that we no longer just take them for granted, but we can assertively figure out how we should best relate to these things. And that's true of everything that has a sort of messianic flavor to it, or that we just take for granted, whether it's our own government, the passport we inherited, the religious, stuff that we may have. And I think that, to me, that's what developing consciousness in general looks like. It looks like being very self-aware and choosing how you interact with other things. And I think that, at least at its roots, much of this community is encouraging something that's a very similar process of individual, where we kind of went back in the beginning, this empowered, autonomous individual who is becoming increasingly aware of how they interact with other things around them, and that process is overwhelmingly positive. And in fact, when that process is done well, it insulates people from the ability of other people to like embrace them in some other thing and be like, this is the only way, embrace this, you have to do it this way, et cetera, et cetera. So
I would just add that, the tools that are being developed, while there are a lot of them are, cryptocurrency developers, they're being developed so that people can use them. You're not telling them how to use the tool. You're saying, here, you now have the ability to create your own DAO. What do you want it to do? And anyone with an internet connection and a cryptocurrency wallet, which is going to continue to increase, the number of people that are getting onto the internet around the world with smartphones is increasing every year. So, we mentioned like native earlier, but anyone can eventually go use those tools that make it really easy for you to create your own tools around for economic empowerment around the world. And then each community itself can do that. And we're still really early. So, WordPress made it really easy for anyone in the world to make their own website. That wasn't a here, make websites, like you should make websites. It was here, now you don't have to know how to code necessarily to build your own website and be able to communicate your story with the world.
Yeah, one more thing I just wanted to add really quickly is just the reminder that this is so early. It's so early. We're in the beta mode of all of this. And I'm so glad that many of the people that are well-intentioned in this community are asking these questions of themselves. And there's been examples and articles written about neocolonialism and examples in places like Puerto Rico and all these things that are occurring. And so I'm very happy that those questions are being asked, and I think they're among the most important questions being asked today. And I do believe that as we continue to grow and develop and be intentional about the ways in which we do that, that access to these tools and information are going to increase and expand as well.
Yeah. I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Oh, great. Yeah. Back in the 16th century, Elizabeth I had a protocol involving a box with 2 locks, which precisely anticipated public key encryption. Now, if we had a physical layer Tor, then we would be able to exchange goods in a free and anonymous way. But I can't see a way of practically implementing it. I wonder if anyone's given any thought to bringing these concepts out of the data space.
I was just having a conversation at the Blockchain Economic Forum in San Francisco about this 2 days ago, and it was about drone ATMs. It was very interesting because it had the idea that you might put cash in a box or something, and then the drone will come down, sweep around, pick up the cash, and then credit you Bitcoins to your account. Which has a whole bunch of interesting, the infrastructure-related questions about it, of which the person who was relaying this to me was kind of saying a little musing because he thought that the person building the project had a lot of enthusiasm, but there were just some sticking points as to, whether or not you would want a drone sweeping down on you as you're at the local cafe or something like that. I've looked at a number of projects that are kind of in this broad spectrum, and there are some really interesting things underway. The ones that are going to solve the problem, I guess, are probably ones that have sort of some clear utility behind them that is not super technologically complex to implement. And I've actually thought of several things that are on this sort of 2 locking spectrum that for me were sort of thought experiments. But I'm happy actually to have a conversation with you and go through that, because I think that they do illustrate the types of issues that you get into when you look at physical infrastructure integration. So in general with these things, my sense, and this is also true of AI and automation and blockchains, is that you need things that are custom designed from scratch to integrate with a kind of blockchain methodology. And so when you go into the hardware level, you have to go into it with a certain mentality, and that means that there's a, as well, time lag in implementing the kind of requisite hardware for that particular, that would integrate well.
Thank you all.